we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Friday, January 5th. So, yeah. Boy do I need a second part of that sentence. Like, I really don't have anything to say at that point. Let's hop into Yu-Gi-Oh! Here. So, apparently, the public deck search will not be available during the following period, which this notice only really for me serves to remind me that public deck search exists in the first place. We might need to look and just see how that's even done. A new selection pack is coming when have it set. A couple selection packs are going to disappear, and instead we're getting this on January 9th. Okay. And with that, there is a new secret pack also being introduced, which I wouldn't say Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been terrible, but they certainly haven't been amazing about adding new packs. I assume the new packs are built into the actual release of actual packs in at least Japan, and so they can't probably introduce a bunch of new packs unless they're going to introduce packs of older cards, which wouldn't be a terrible thought, certainly. Like, clearly Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel came out years, decades past the initial release of Yu-Gi-Oh! The trading card game in Japan, so to say, hey, let's re-release a bunch of booster packs from the past wouldn't be a terrible thought. It would give you a bunch of old cards that aren't very playable and would probably devalue the general idea of booster packs anyways, but the booster packs in this game, whether they're selection packs or secret packs or whatever, are pretty worthless anyways. There's just too many cards. Although in all fairness, if you were a whale and you were just going to buy a massive amount of cards, your best bet almost certainly is to buy a specific secret pack and use that as your goal and as your focus to building a deck and getting cards that are actually viable and playable and ranked. How many tickets do we really have here? It says we have 30, so just 10 is fine. So, yeah. Had a unpaused long period of silence in the last stream, and I just edited that out for the video upload. Although I think I probably didn't even bother to upload the video that got me my channel deleted and it being reduced to a warning. Which, yeah, it's just better that that be a lost episode. As it is. That solves that problem. We have yet another event, and this is where it gets really annoying, is that you have these events in the first week when playing ranked is your first best bet. Oh, and we were gonna search for decks. Let's see. Public deck search. Is it here? Nope. When did this get added? That feels new. And weirdly, it does seem like it is not laid out well. So I guess you could search by card names, but you can't name your deck to show a card. And seemingly people can't even show off their card art box. So there's not even some weirdness where you could have like a specific card and then an art case, and those two combined might say something rude. So this does feel very much like it would be very difficult to search still. and face down cards being shown is a weird thing that you somehow could do that. So if I was going to share this deck, how would you even do that? It definitely doesn't feel like there's a way to do that. And then what's this card history do? Seemingly nothing. So if I was to put this in card history, what does that mean? Yeah, I have just no idea. We really need a tutorial just to explain what the game does, don't I? At least I do. Yeah, this just seems like this is overflowing, and if that's going to be the case, that this is going to overflow like this, then it would just make a lot of sense to stop the window scrolling in the background above that, instead of being able to sort of click through in the background. And it seems like you could be aiming for this button and then slip well enough that you could hit there. Not, you'd have to slip quite a bit. Okay, so for the accountability section, while we play this dragon type only, which this is, we're gonna just take this first deck and start using it. Doesn't seem like you can even make your own decks. Yeah, it's a rental only challenge, so everybody's playing with the same 3 decks, which probably makes a more equal playing field. I'm still playing Zelda Skyward Sword. I suspect I'm probably somewhere around 70% done with the game. I wouldn't be surprised if I'm actually closer to 84% done with the game. I guesstimate these percentages, but I do like to have a level of accuracy that is higher than most people are used to, where most people would say, 50%, halfway done, 90% done, when they're really only 70% done. But yeah. I feel like either the game is inherently getting easier as I upgrade my sword, as far as swinging the sword and attacking enemies, or I've just subconsciously gotten better at actually controlling the game, which lines up with a bigger problem I feel with Skyward Sword. It's the opponent's turn. It seems like they're just taking their time, which is the game is too difficult at the beginning, and there definitely feels like there's a danger that by the time you're at the end of the game you'll be an expert at it, but that'll be right at the ending of the game. And that is a problem that can happen certainly in lots of games, in RPG games in particular, where you just get really powerful at the end and people tend to forget how grindy and frustrating the beginning is. But that also leads to the point where you have a lot of people leaving games very early. There is almost certainly a bell curve where players leave a game early because it's too difficult at the beginning, or they get past that point and they stick with the game and play at least till 75% of the way through the game, and then they run into some final boss that's very difficult and give up then, or a percentage of players do, certainly. Obviously some players make it all the way to the credits, but the number of people that do make it to the credits is fairly low. Often it's 50%, 30%. In some games it's 1% of the player base. And I just, in Zelda's case, don't like the idea that it's so unbalanced. Now inherently Breath of the Wild tried to make it so the whole world was unbalanced, was extremely balanced, and it still didn't really work, because it just created a situation where nothing was particularly challenging or exciting in that case. I think that's mostly comes down to my experience of Breath of the Wild in particular, where I didn't actually fight Ganondorf, who would have been the final boss, and only fought 2 or 3 of the divine beasts. I think 2 of them. The stamina system is still a nightmare. The swinging gimmick system of Skyward Sword is still a nightmare. It's slightly better with an upgraded sword, but that's only slightly. The sword you have is not called the Master Sword. They never use that phrase. It is just some kind of other sword. In fact, the whole game has kind of this like technology element to it that makes it feel like the whole game may just be happening in the Matrix. If you told me that Skyward Sword was happening in the dreams of Link from Breath of the Wild, I'd believe you, because he was like frozen effectively for some amount of time. But I'd also believe you if you said that Skyward Sword happened after the events of Tears of the Kingdom, because there's some line up there too. There's also an element that this probably has something to do with just changing attitudes and a reduction in self-censorship. But when I think of the original NES Zelda game, there's really not any element of Eastern influence at all. And you definitely saw in Breath of the Wild these mummified Tibetan monk-like characters playing a big role, and there being a spirituality to it. And Skyward Sword has some of that too. There is this old lady monk that looks very much like the other mummified monks in Breath of the Wild, which, yeah, I imagine that is just what monks sometimes look like in the real world. There's a weird influence of dance in Skyward Sword, where you have this character that just dances as it's talking to you. It doesn't really make any sense and doesn't have any gameplay mechanic built into it at all. It's just a dance sequence that literally is the same dance sequence repeated 3 times. You have a harp that you play to play music, but you don't actually play the harp or press any buttons to play the harp like Ocarina of Time, so it is very much limited to what a Wiimote could do, in which you're just swinging the Wiimote back and forth to strum it. And even that, the animation is pretty poor in that his fingers just kind of awkwardly reset. Also, when he's climbing ladders, the animation there is pretty poor as far as how it awkwardly moves the character. Okay. Let's see if we can do this. But the major problem I'm having with Skyward Sword is that there's just too many collectibles. And certainly some of this is probably looking at Ocarina of Time with rose-colored glasses and just being nostalgic for a game that Ocarina of Time really wasn't. But there's just, I would say, 30 different collectible items. 15 of which, no, it's got to be more than 30. It's probably closer to 50 collectible items. 15 of which are monster items that you often find in chests, and then 15 of which are bug items or other kind of collectibles, with 2 of those collectibles being fairly frustrating in the fact that one of the collectibles requires you to use a bug net to activate it. To collect it, tumbleweeds and bird's feathers both require a... See, here's a great example of where card placement actually mattered. So while you can get pretty much everything else from bugs that are very much easier to collect and spread out in more areas, to get feathers you have to go to one of the 3 land masses, which the whole game has expanded quite a bit now, so that I know there are actually 2 temples and connected to each land mass, and the darn it, that is not what I wanted to do. Can't undo it now, can I? So yeah. In the desert location, that's the only place you can get tumbleweeds, and you have to use a bug catching net to collect the tumbleweeds, and they're just rolling around, and so you have to run after them and catch them, and you need about 10. And that is another problem with all the collectibles in the game, is that there's 1, maybe 2 items that you can get up to 99 of, and then you'll never really use them, and they're not very valuable, so even if you struggled to try and sell them, you're not going to get enough gold. Rupees. Honestly, there's kind of a struggle in rupees unless there's some major late game elements. Like the biggest wallet I have found could get you up to 5,000 rupees, and I'm not sure there's ever really a time where you would need to spend even 2,000 rupees. Most things are well below 1,000 and closer to 100, 200, 300, 400. The item selection loadout system is just stupid. It plays almost no part in the game at all, and it is really just trying to say that some items aren't 100% necessary, but in that includes bottles, and bottles are pretty much 100% necessary. You can get up to 3 bottles, I think, in the whole game, but then the health potions you upgrade using the insect and other collectible items, so you might be able to use a health potion 2, maybe even 3 times per bottle, which is about the only justification for the bottles to, or the collectible parts, the insects, to even make sense. Upgradable weapons, not by defeating dungeons, but by finding collectibles. Upgradable shields, not by defeating dungeons, but by using collectibles. Most of the items are inherently built into being purchasable, so you can buy a basic shield. They keep activating all these Dragon Maid features for no good reason. I'm just gonna lose, so let's just go ahead and surrender now. That was a learning experience, to say the least. But inherently I could just get 3 quick disconnects and be done with this rental event and not really care. On top of the monk being Asian influenced in Skyward Sword, there's a water dragon that is very Asian influenced. And, you know, that just doesn't really feel like Zelda to me. It didn't feel like it in Breath of the Wild. It didn't feel like it here in Skyward Sword. When I think of Zelda, I think the foundation has to really be set in a Tolkien-esque elves and fairies, more English, Central European. Let's just call it English. I think that's probably accurate. J.R. Tolkien fantasy world. I don't expect to see anything Asian influenced. There's a mission where you find a ghost in the bathroom, which that's just a old, like, wise tale, old scary story kids tell each other in Japan, that one of the bathroom stalls is haunted in the school. I think there's an anime based on it that came out in the last year or so. But I don't think the Asian influence really affects it that much. As far as the bigger problem with Skyward Sword is that it's just heavily reliant on gimmicks from the Wiimote. There's a whole jumping off things and then tilting the Wiimote left and right so that you can land on a platform that it almost always looks like you shouldn't be able to land on. And with an Xbox controller, it just doesn't make sense because it feels like you should be pressing forward, and the amount you can move pressing forward or back is very minimal, whereas left and right is very high. And so there almost certainly are natural movements that a Wiimote would have just been naturally the way you would have moved. And with a controller where all of that is just being mapped to the right stick, the movement is much, much more awkward. And perhaps I should have just played with a Joy-Con instead from the beginning and just learned it. Of course, then I probably would have needed to find the straps for the Joy-Con. Where do I put them? I imagine they're in the carrying case pocket. But there's a secondary problem, certainly, in that there's slightly too many collectibles, with there not really being a major reward for the collectibles. I kind of feel like what should happen in any Zelda game is that, and no Zelda game has really been like this, is that you should get higher amounts of health, or get stronger, or get higher amounts of defense fairly early, and it just doesn't really happen like that. What happens when we do this? Doesn't seem like in Skyward Sword you ever upgrade your outfit. You're always in the just in the green tunic, which is fine. Seems like you could play almost the entirety of the game without a shield, and the shield deflecting mechanic is yet another mechanic that probably was a lot more logical when you were playing with the nunchuck connection to a Wiimote, where you were jabbing forward the nunchuck to do a motion action, but it makes no sense when you have to left click the left button, left analog stick. There's people that want you to run around and do them little quests, But like the collectibles, none of those things are really great experiences. And once you get about 80 to 90% done with any of these side quest things, you add to the dowsing ability where you can find the last few of them, because even the game knows that finding the last quest is going to be nearly impossible if you just had to run around. In fact, the whole game is nearly impossible, and I've multiple times had trouble just trying to figure out where I'm supposed to go, what I'm supposed to do, what the solution is in general for this small puzzle section. All of the dungeons are fairly heavy into the puzzling aspects, and very rarely are you fighting things. In fact, the game, I think, bends over backwards to make a situation where you don't actually have to be that good at the fighting mechanic. And so there are points where you'll shoot a little flying mechanical beetle around, and that is obviously there to just have falling action, just to waste the player's time. There's way too many loads in the game, which that was a problem, I imagine, for all Nintendo games even now. But the temples still, for the most part, are 4 or 5 rooms, fairly big rooms, but there's not really a ton of stuff going on there. There'll be one puzzle in each room that needs to be solved, so you're getting 4 or 5 little challenges. Only in the final boss sections and maybe one other place do you actually get locked in a room and actually have to fight enemies. Obviously there's a problem that evolved as they went from making top-down 2D games that are tile-based in the Zelda series to making 3D levels. It was just a lot more work to make the 3D levels than it was to make the tile-based rooms. In fairness, even the original Zelda, though, even though there was a lot more rooms for top-down tile-based things, that most of the rooms were fairly simplistic, and most rooms did involve a lot of fighting. So, yeah. The evolution to 3D pushed them clearly in directions that they weren't 100% happy about, that they weren't as effective. I won't speak to happiness at implementing. There is a weird section where, hey, I might actually get some fusion summoning polymerization proficiency quest done doing this, come to think of it. There's a section where you're on a motorboat instead of a sail on an ocean, and with that there's kind of a throwback to Wind Waker, but they do nothing with it, and it does not feel integrated or like it matters at all. Since the land masses are double, what they originally seemed like, that makes the open world sections that connect the two temples a lot bigger, but the open world sections are at least 70% only there so you can collect bugs and monster parts, and for them to randomly spawn in enemies, which, yeah. the random spawning of enemies in the open world sections is clearly trying to make up for the fact that there isn't really any fighting, or a lot of fighting, in the temples. But it just doesn't work, because you can almost always run past the enemies, which is a decent thought if you're struggling with the sword swinging or struggling with the stamina, as I am. But then you wouldn't get all the pickups, but you don't get pickups that often anyways. I would say the secondary items you collect are fine. You get the bomb bag, you get the slingshot, you get the bow. Then you get a unique electric beetle, and then you get a horn in which you just blow dust around, which is a gimmick that doesn't really work or get used that much. It feels very reminiscent of Luigi's Mansion 3 and Luigi's Mansion in general, just using the vacuum cleaner to suck or blow things. But yeah, you don't use it too much, and the horn is probably one of the worst of the available items. There's a whip, and you don't use that very much either. Let's see, is there? Well, there's some other weapons. See, send the biggest dragon, I guess, into the graveyard. Potentially return this to hand. Should I fusion summon something? It's a time to see. Interesting synchronization there. One dragon made monster. So I could have potentially won this turn. Maybe. I haven't seen Zelda at all since she went through a Temple of Time gate and it got blown up behind her, which happened fairly early in the game. I'd say that was probably the end of the first act, and after that, that was like the point where you're pretty much left on your own and going through these trials to strengthen your sword and oddly elongate your sword, which somehow makes it easier to hit enemies. But again, that feels very much like an Asian influence where they're going for longer swords. Although in all fairness, the short sword, the long sword were all things that were in earlier versions of Zelda games. It definitely though feels like a case where I am just stuck in the past, and I want there to be a dungeon specifically designed around learning how to use your shield, and by using the shield you get a stronger shield, and that should be fairly early in the game. In general, the slingshot has always been a fairly weak weapon that gets forgotten about, and a lot of the secondary items get forgotten about, and that's always a bit of a tragedy, because ideally your final dungeon would require the use of every single item fairly heavily, and even getting creative as to how you synergize and use two items together. But yeah, once you get the bow and arrow, you almost never need the slingshot, and the bow and arrow is just way better in every way. And they never make arrows that scarce, or they really can't, because if they made arrows scarce, you couldn't use the bow and arrow when you needed to use it. They don't make arrows expensive. Alright, let's see what this does first. I'll toss that. And toss this. But yeah, I just don't feel like, particularly in Skyward Sword, you ever really needed to learn how to use the shield. Special summon that card. Let's activate this effect and see what this does. So I'd probably make it sound like I just totally hate Skyward Sword, and I don't, but it certainly doesn't come off as being anywhere as interesting to me as Ocarina of Time. I never pronounce that right. I add an R for no reason. I'm thinking orca as far as a fish. Or mammal, sea-based land mammal, I believe it is. Let's see. I've just never played Majora's Mask. Now, I feel like Wind Waker was very weird, but certainly in retrospect now, with there being Skyward Sword, with there being Breath of the Wild, with there being Tears of the Kingdom, even with there being Twilight Princess, another game I haven't played, there definitely feels like there are off games and there are on games, but more and more after Wind Waker, the on games are trying to be something very different from what Wind Waker was. And in fairness, I think Ocarina of Time actually was way too long of a game, and maybe just oversatisfied too much. But I could pretty much forget most of. Hey, we got that proficiency done, and we got a victory. So if we just get one more victory, we'll be done with this, and we won't even have to deal with the other two decks. Which, you know, I don't really care enough to go and try and play and figure out the other decks, which is the one thing I imagine these rental events would want you to do, is play with the other decks. And perhaps there's room for a system there where decks get timed out after you use them 3 times, and then you have to use the other decks 3 times to refill the ability to go back and play with that original deck. There was some kind of stamina built into the decks when they're rental decks. But yeah, I had a fairly violent reaction to Breath of the Wild. Not really. I wasn't punching a wall or anything like that. I don't do those kinds of things, but I definitely did not feel like Breath of the Wild was anywhere close to being a Zelda game. And everything that I didn't like about Breath of the Wild is the foundation of it is laid down in Skyward Sword, which inherently means for the newest generation of fans that did like Breath of the Wild, they probably will enjoy Skyward Sword as a look back more than the other Zelda games, where even trying to get them to play Ocarina of Time is going to feel old and awkward. I don't know if I've ever even played the updated version of Ocarina of Time, where things were slightly different. There was like a spin attack in swimming in Skyward Sword that highlights yet another example of it being fairly logical to shake the Wiimote to spin while swimming if you have a Wiimote, and not being logical or being explained at all as far as there's just not any instructions there. Yeah, I don't really fully appreciate that idea of any game being ported and then a lackluster amount of instruction being given. And I imagine it would have been a fairly lackluster amount of instruction given anyways. Like, for the people who first played the game, it doesn't feel like there would have been extra instruction. There are these walls where you're supposed to point the Wiimote and draw. I have never successfully drawn a symbol on them that would give me anything other than hearts, whereas you're supposed to be able to draw the sign of money, which I don't know if that's supposed to be the dollar sign or the sign of a rupee, or if it's supposed to be a yen sign, which would be my other guess. But I've tried it once and it didn't work, and so when it doesn't work, it just then gives me 3 hearts, which that's fine. You need 3 hearts more than you need rupees in the long run. I'm still taking massive amounts of damage when fighting bosses. Bosses are incredibly difficult, and I've failed on every single boss the first time. So I'm not getting any better, and I would say, again, I'm somewhere between 70 and 80% done with the game. And that really shouldn't be the case as to how Zelda games go. Zelda games should be fairly easy. I wouldn't say they should be baby's first adventure game, but they should be close to baby's first adventure game. They should be pre-teens, young teens adventure game. They shouldn't try and be Final Fantasy. which are RPG games really, with all those mechanics. And I don't know if there really is a good example of a great adventure game to even compare it to, but if there is a theoretical, this is an adventure game that's really difficult, Zelda games should not be that. It shouldn't be Dark Souls. Perhaps this may be a better comparison. And yeah, in a lot of ways it shouldn't be Dark Souls. It shouldn't just be this big open world where there aren't really anything to do. And even they know that the open world sections really don't have enough to do in them, so they've got a whole second section where you're going into an alternate instance of the world and you're just running around collecting beacons. And once you've gotten to the point where you are activating and collecting beacons, yeah, once you're running around activating beacons in any game that is a sign that they haven't created an interesting gameplay mechanic, or a good way of visually depicting that gameplay mechanic at least. There aren't perhaps enough people, enough interesting characters that you're talking to. You run into the same characters a little more often than you probably should. Let's see what happens if we activate this. $5,005 monster attack. Interesting. Would there ever be a good reason to do that, though? Have to be 5 really weak monsters for it to make sense. Although that is a nice card, 5-headed Link Dragon. 5 monsters for 5,000 attack. Earthwind Dragon. Here we've got something even stronger for 5. Cannot be destroyed by dark, earth, water, fire, wind. That was a light monster. You got me there. For the rest of the accountability section here, and definitely these segments are getting shorter. We're going 50 minutes instead of an hour. Since I have just been playing Breath of the Wild, I haven't been working on my Smart On Air sign at all. I'm definitely just taking a little vacation from that, which is stupid because I really shouldn't be taking a vacation on a product that I need to launch and try and actually sell and try and actually make money on. But yeah. And there's undoubtedly some other things that I still need to work on. Lots of other things that I need to work on. I am still monitoring with my smart alarm clock the temperature in my refrigerator, and the temperature meter, that's also a smart and long clock hygrometer. It is at the front on the top shelf, so it should be fairly cold, and I would like my refrigerator to be closer to 35 degrees, but packed full of food as it has been for the past couple days, it's struggling even at the highest setting to be at 41 degrees. It seems to be 41 and a half. So either it's a case where there's just a poor amount of airflow, which is believable, because it's so packed full, or it's a case where being packed full of things, it's just takes it a really long time to get everything cold, or it's just not a very good refrigerator at the temperatures. They say very much that 40 to 140 is the danger zone for bacteria, so to have a refrigerator in that danger zone does not seem acceptable to me. But yeah, so far it would take weeks before food would start to spoil. I wonder if there is perhaps some internal adjustment I could make it go cooler, because the settings are lackluster. There are 4 cold settings and I have it on super cool already. And I wonder if maybe there's a element there where there is a there's a temperature meter that is too close to the wrong place, to the fan or something like that, and so it thinks it's colder than it is overall. There is something to be said about having an older refrigerator where it's literally just a dial. My old refrigerator was right in the medium section, and I maybe turned it down after 8 to 10 years of using my old refrigerator. There isn't even really an adjustment between the freezer and the refrigerator settings, so freezer seems to just constantly try and be as cold as it can be. There is, I think, a very simplistic slide adapter there that maybe directs things. Yep. So, while I'm overall happy with the freezer and its size, and I got the door, but still really haven't gotten the freezer door to swing closed by tilting it back, the coldness, which is the #1 factor, still seems to be not really where I'd want it to be. I also found out on my old refrigerator there's this drawer called the cool zone, which, to my surprise, after reading the instructions, was designed to be warmer than the rest of the refrigerator, and it's for effectively just thawing meat is what they suggested to use it for, that you're going to eat in the next couple of days. Whereas I thought it was more of a fruits and vegetables drawer, although there were already fruits and vegetables bins above that, or perhaps it often is displayed as being like for wine, and has a little rack you can put wine bottles on it, which I guess maybe chilled wine wouldn't be as cold as the rest of your refrigerator. Good news is that even after buying a ton of food to fill the new refrigerator. There's still plenty of empty space in the old one, so if necessary, I can move food over. Okay. So we have to go all the way back up here, I guess. We click on this to get to the proficiency test. Then we get this card protector, Synchro Silver. Then we get the animation that unlocks things. So we see that there is a level 9, and we want a ritual summon, pendulum summon, and link summon 3 things, which, yeah, it feels like we could do that. Then we have to pass the test, which we'll do that probably on Monday. And then it feels like if they're giving me 10 legacy packs now, I wouldn't be surprised if this might go on forever and you just constantly get 10 legacy packs. Let's try a different deck. 2-star Sacred Sealed Dragons. It's far too ambitious to say this out loud, but I would say that it would be nice if there was a way that I could fund the development and work on the development of a smart thermostat hygrometer that was specifically designed to work, particularly in freezers. Because yeah, that's a problem, and almost certainly you would need a sensor wire, and almost certainly you need to figure out some way to wrap a wire into a refrigerator without breaking the seal. Whether you're doing that by running it through the connectors of a ice machine, if there's an ice machine, as far as like where the water would come through, and then putting a probe in there, and then having the rest of the device outside the metal box that would block interference, or some other way. Drilling a hole in your refrigerator does not seem logical for a smart device. Sending some kind of magnetic signal through a metal box is probably not really doable, where you can do like a wireless charging technology. Like, clearly the industry needs some kind of standard where they're going to put some kind of connector, probably a USB-C connector, for some kind of meter. Whereas refrigerators and freezers build in that technology and then charge you thousands of dollars. It's very much like the car industry, where a radio in a car should be probably $150 for a really good one, and yet the markup to have one installed by the original equipment manufacturer is thousands and thousands of dollars. Same with refrigerators. To have a smart Samsung refrigerator is going to mark up the price by thousands and thousands of dollars, instead of $50, which is really where it should be. But yeah, I suppose if my smart on air sign just made me $1 million, well, here's the flippant $1 million pledge. If it made me my first $1 million that I could live off of, and then I started to see a second million, a third million, a fourth $1 million, then yeah, at some point there is just this idea where I do potentially see making a company and a brand around smart devices instead of just a single product, or several versions of a single product. I don't have a ton of ideas there, though. Clearly, in the smart home market, there are some things that are missing. There's still, for no real reason, no kind of pressure mats that exist. Nothing that would sense when you're lying in bed and when you're not in bed, or when you're standing on a doormat or when you're not standing on a doormat. As far as just presence sensor, and it's just kind of crazy that that's the case. There isn't a lot of options as far as fall detection when there's definitely room for that. We still have never seen anybody design anything that would dust cells and just dust products, like a smart vacuum. Vacuums are smart mops. So if you are thinking of what a homekeeper might do on a daily basis, or on a weekly basis, or monthly basis, dusting still is going to be a big factor there. And there's just no option around that. When I think you could probably make a device that had a long pole on it and a compressor on it, and then would look at what it's looking at and put a blast of air at that point. Of course, it probably should take some live footage or something like this. Yeah, because I definitely could see a case where a blast of air might knock something out of place, and then you would have this desire and need to alert somebody to put things back where it was. Or if you could identify just the general weight of things and whether you should put a strong blast of air on it or not. Weirdly, there is no smart device that cleans out kitty litter boxes to a final solution. And I'm not sure what that final solution really is, because like either on kitty litter, not really having ever had a house cat, I imagine you're either scooping and flushing kitty litter, or you are, which you probably shouldn't do and probably are told not to do, or you're bagging and trashing kitty litter. Perhaps there are some people that are composting, and that probably wouldn't be a terrible thought. But there's no way to take that final step. Nobody's invented a way to take that final step and do something with it. When I think about it, if you're going to have an automatic vacuum, an automatic lawnmower, you probably should have a composting robot that could pick up some compost and spread it on your grass and keep your grass healthy. So you could have a whole collection of devices, something that grabbed kitty litter and other like compostable trash and shoved it into a composter, which I'd assume is outside and would rotate itself on a schedule, and then an automatic vacuum cleaner, not vacuum cleaner, an automatic lawnmower would pick up the finalized version of the compost and spread it as a spreader. In fact, just an automatic seed spreader attachment to an automatic lawnmower would be great. Yeah, just trying to think of just all the different kinds of little projects. We still don't have a robot that takes trash out in general. That's a hassle. Nobody likes hauling dirty, stinky trash bags. We don't have anything that collects leaves and mulches them. I guess an automatic lawnmower might be able to handle leaves if it gets to it fast and does it on a daily basis. We don't have anything that washes cars, which automatic car washes, as far as a paid service, have existed for a long time, so turning something like that around would make some sense. There probably is a sprinkler system that, if they programmed it well, could turn around, a sprinkler head that could turn around and spray your car, but it would be a very hands-off thing where yeah, it definitely would be a very hands-off thing where it would just be spraying soap and water, if it even sprays soap. I think this is going to be our last game, and I think I'm rambling quite a bit. So, according to this Reddit post, I've personally just given up and allowed Windows Defender to just ignore the virus it thinks it's running into. But it does seem to shed some light, because this post, or this response to this post here, says it's a known issue. Domains included in the anti-malware list, which is meant to block access, can be found by scanning software which judges it to be a virus. Which, that is way too simplistic of a reason to immediately claim a severe phishing virus is on your computer. And you would have definitely wanted to see a few more heuristics there. Although I guess it has just been a long-running issue that one antivirus fairly consistently decides to block and call the other antivirus a virus. And there is just this level of ridiculous competition that seems to exist. As far as uBlock Origin goes, though, I literally can't do anything, can I? Just gonna lose. Like, when you look at the settings on the My Filters of uBlock Origin on Firefox, there's several built-in things. So I don't know if it was really bothering you that bad, whether it would be logical or even helpful to disable, say, the bad aware risks, which protects you from 7,744 things, or if you're supposed to disable the online malicious URL block list, which is 10,126, which, yeah, that could be it too. There are more and custom block lists you can include. Although inherently, I don't know if add uBlock Origin in my case needs to actually block anything, because I already have AdGuard Home running on my router, blocking a lot of bad viruses. Although noticeably, AdGuard Home with the VPN WireGuard enabled was also blocking like Microsoft Photos from working, which I don't use Microsoft Photos that often, so it's not a big deal, but there was something weird about the VPN taking too long, and the page is just never loading because of that just being actively blocked, which that's the first time in over a year using AdGuard Home that I've run into anything legitimate being blocked. My biggest problem is I've got 2 or 3 devices that are just constantly trying to send things back to Netflix, and yeah, that's a nightmare that needs to probably be worked on. Okay, let's talk about video games, since we've talked very little about video games other than Skyward Sword. The Surgeon Simulator developer Bossa Studios has confirmed layoffs. The studio has reportedly cut 19 jobs, or roughly 1/3 of its entire workforce. It's always a little surprising to realize how a lot of these companies are fairly small, having less than 100 employees, or in this case, less than 60 employees. It is also a little weird to confirm layoffs now, after the new year. I would have to assume that they were just late to the party. It definitely, or it might be a case that they were trying to be very nice, but it really isn't that much nicer to have people go into debt and feel like they're securing their job for a while, and then January 5th be laid off because of the Christmas event. I get the initial impulse there that you would maybe not want to lay off people during Christmas time, but Christmas time really was the time to do it. Early December is really the time to do it before people start shopping, so probably even before Black Friday is the best time to lay off people, particularly if you're not a retailer and not really affected by Black Friday as much. But yeah, it doesn't feel particularly good. This is the first layoff story of the year, and it very possibly will be a story that people remember for a lot longer now, because nobody else is going to announce layoffs until probably after tax day, after mid-April. Last of Us is retweeting somebody with a tattoo, and I think there is definitely something to be said about not encouraging this. This is a Ellie Last of Us tattoo, I assume, but it's not even really a great tattoo, because it says endure and survive, and you've got a knife here, which I guess technically you can survive with a knife, but generally you're not just surviving, you're killing or harming with a knife. And the plants don't really mean anything to me at all, as far as the knife being slowly converted into what looks like the stem of these plants. Plus, in general, it's going to heavily come down to whether you like Ellie or not. But I definitely would say getting a video game tattoo does not make a lot of sense. Even if you were going to get the most iconic tattoos, it's going to come off as very cliche. And tattoos in general, I've never really been able to find one that felt like it would make sense and that I would still be in love with it decades later, or it would just look good as I aged, as my skin aged. But yeah, a Hyrule symbol, a Zelda symbol, a Triforce symbol, which, by the way, Skyward Sword is showing the Triforce showing up on the back of the hand of Link, but the word Triforce has never been spoken. It's like Skyward Sword is set so far in the future that all those concepts have been completely forgotten about. So yeah, that's another element that makes it not really feel like a Zelda game. They also have a character named Impa show up, but she literally shows up at one scene and then you see her again in another scene and then she's gone for the game, which, yeah, that's not character development in any ways. Moving on, Gamatsu says that Platinum Games is deciding to delist World of Demons from Apple Arcade on January 18th. Existing downloads are going to no longer be playable starting February 1st. This is a side game, obviously, from Platinum Games that I don't think very many people have heard of. I don't recognize it by any means. I wonder if we're starting to see a hint at the end of Apple Arcade or in total, which I could see Apple doing that. Well, Apple doesn't have as terrible of a history as Google does of shutting down things and canceling projects. Apple, I think, has decided with their new M2, M3 chips to try and be a gaming powerhouse on their cell phones and laptops, which leaves Apple Arcade, which is mostly for the Apple TV device, in an awkward position. And I do think that they probably are going to get that they probably will decide to either go whole hog on calling everything Apple Arcade and making it like a Game Pass system that you can get games on a cell phone or a MacBook, or they're going to just abandon Apple Arcade and games on Apple products are just going to be games on Apple products without any special labeling and branding, which they don't really need special labeling and branding. And part of the step of going in that direction would be to slowly have people just remove their games from Apple Arcade before announcing a complete shutdown of the service. I believe Apple Arcade games are streaming games, but I could be wrong about that. Of course, it might also be a case that Platinum Games themselves is just getting rid of it for one reason or another. They didn't state a real reason. Maybe there was a license issue, maybe they don't want the creator of Bayonetta around, any of his games to stick around if they can cancel them, or maybe they just are going in a different direction. The IGDA posted this photo of IGDA Greece kept busy with activities throughout 2023, and here you can see a fairly large number of people at some events from 2023 for IGDA, International Game Developers Association. I think inherently I am seeing more of their posts on Twitter, and for one reason or another, and they probably are a better source to follow than GameDeveloper.com as far as just where the developers really are going. Although they don't seem to really post much of anything other than things about themselves so far. So I may find the IGDA as a news source being useless because they're really only talking about themselves and they're not really saying anything very substantive at that point. Yep. Here we have GameDeveloper.com with the same story. We also have GameDeveloper.com saying that Football Manager hits 6 million players for a second consecutive year. The franchise has exceeded expectations in recent years. Almost certainly, I would guess this is directly due to the fact that FIFA is not FIFA anymore. They don't have the FIFA license, and so there are no new FIFA games, and EA Football Club hasn't been an amazing replacement. So soccer fans, football fans, to the rest of the world may be breaking off in some part, and there may be an audience that in the past were playing the interactive FIFA games where you play as soccer players to play games, and they are now breaking off to Football Manager, which is a spreadsheet management game, to my understanding, which I suspect that there's room for something like that to happen with American football too, and baseball. There is a lot of people who are deep into the stats and want to be the coach, and then there are people who really want to be the player. And I think the people who want to be the coach have probably been underserved up until this point. Here we have Video Games Chronicle also talking about the layoffs. We're currently working on a new IP called Lost Skies. Now the problem with Bossa Studios and Surgeon Simulator is it really just was a lucky gimmick joke game that streamers were playing. I don't think there really is a fun game experience after about 20 minutes in Surgeon Simulator, and there's not really a lot of places you can go after that. If anything, Surgeon Simulator should have been the intro prologue experience to a real-world surgery simulation game that was much more difficult and much more complicated, or it was going to be a silly surgery game that just had more of a story like Trauma Center series did, even if Trauma Center went way crazy with magic effectively. Apparently Metal Gear Solid Delta and Silent Hill 2 will release this year according to PlayStation. I also saw that there's a potential here where Paramount and Warner Brothers will merge together. Saw another YouTuber talking about that. And, you know, if WB and Paramount merge together, they could probably have slightly better offerings. It is probably the right move, but they still would not be even third on the list of streaming services. Warner Brothers has a deep history of like movies, and that's mostly what they have to sell, whereas Warner Brothers video games and all of that being owned by AT&T now makes it actually very difficult that this merger would actually happen anytime soon. They'd probably just wait a year and then merge. But yeah, Warner Brothers Games is still very much in a question mark. What AT&T would do with Warner Brothers is very much a huge question mark. And Warner Brothers TV is pretty much non-existent. I couldn't even name a recent TV Warner Brothers show. Yeah, at one point there was WB Kids and a whole animation section owned by Warner Brothers, and they really haven't done anything with that, I think, in decades. And then Paramount has all the Star Trek stuff, and that's about it. So they don't really bring too much to the process, other than bringing Star Trek to a streaming service that isn't just exclusively selling itself on Star Trek and nothing else, and maybe Yellowstone. There are a decent number of old Paramount shows, I think, and perhaps not that many Paramount movies, so there's a logic to merging two companies that are weak in both categories, but very quickly both companies should just be merged with Hulu and back on Hulu, would be my guess. Moving on, a Sonic the Hedgehog McDonald's Happy Meal has arrived in the UK, which is a little surprising. Happy Meals still exist, and generally it feels like Happy Meals are not things that you really buy by going to McDonald's as much as you order them online, and then they are these like really expensive collector's edition products. But I think you probably can go to a McDonald's and get a Happy Meal. I don't think any kids really are. Sonic clearly is popular with kids these days. Little puzzles seem to be one of the things. Stickers seems to be one of the things. Little cardboard breakout things. Very simplistic toys, for not just cheap plastic toys like you would normally get. Yeah, I severely doubt that too many kids though are going to McDonald's and care about Happy Meals, but whatever. Binding of Isaac, one of the creators, showed off a screenshot for their online section that they're working on. And it's a selection wheel of emojis and emoticons that you can use to communicate with each other without having to implement a typing or voice communication system, which then they would want to monitor. Although, in fairness, it would be kind of hard to say anything that offensive while playing Binding of Isaac with your friends, because the game itself is already pushing the edges of decency, probably, in most people's opinion, past the edges of decency. So if somebody was going to say they slept with your mom on the voice chat while you're playing Binding of Isaac, I think you probably should just expect that that might happen. But yeah, seems like they're gonna work on that. I wouldn't be surprised if we eventually get laws where every single video game company is required to moderate and censor their chat and any kind of internal communication. There's probably some level of that already exists. Definitely in China there's levels of that. Speaking of China, they fired the guy very quickly who put out the proposed changes to the rules as far as Chinese games and lost and caused Tencent and NetEase to lose like $80 billion. And the next day they fired him, and then the next day the stock prices bounced right back, but not all the way back, so they still lost some money there. But inherently it highlights that there's not enough cautious bureaucracy happening in China, that news reports shouldn't just go out. Perhaps that is the same in many countries, that there should be just official authorities, but then the news loves to report on any rumor or even non-binding reports. But clearly they had somebody in authority had an idea there and thought they could do it without causing a major problem, and it did cause a major problem. And I can only imagine that they didn't do the research. But it also might be a case that somebody higher up literally just wanted that person to fall on the sword and make those rules, and then hope it would have not caused as big of a backlash. Gamatsu has the Persona 3 Reload opening movie, which I would assume is still very similar to what the opening movie of Persona 3 would have been before. Persona 3 is the one where they have the magical guns and shoot themselves in the head to release personas. So you have a very graphic depiction here happening, and clearly age restricted in English, not age restricted in Japanese, inherently showing that there is this extra level of censorship that Japanese companies are willing to do for the Westerners, foreigners, versus what they think is acceptable to not be censored in their own language. Apparently Alan Wake's 2 and Baldur's Gate 3 led the 2024 New York Game Award nominees. This is from GameDeveloper.com. Weirdly though, I don't know of this New York Video Game Critics Circle. Apparently it's been going on for 13 years, but definitely doesn't have a level of press. I would assume that it just doesn't have a big event to show off things. Weirdly, they are doing the exact thing that I recommended that the Video Game Awards did, which is they are having the announcement ceremony on January 23rd, giving themselves a whole extra month to just evaluate games from 2023. Although weirdly they're calling it the 2024 Game Awards when it's really including games from 2023 exclusively, and always would be that case. So yeah, there's a list of games here Weirdly, they're giving an Off-Broadway award for Best Indie, which doesn't make a lot of sense to use that phrase in video games. Off-Broadway just generally means the number of people you can get in the audience. On Broadway is a larger audience that you can get in the theater. It's a terrible phrase to even use in theater because it implies that everybody that's on the street Broadway is on Broadway, which isn't actually the way they mean it, and it implies that every play that isn't on the street Broadway is off Broadway, which it doesn't mean that either. And while last I heard, Broadway is still a bustling place to theater district to go in Manhattan, I've also, last I heard, thought that it was struggling with the pandemics in the past. And there's probably Cats, probably plays like Phantom of the Opera that are playing there all the time, but then there's always the struggle to find any new plays that people would hear about or mention it. Even the rapping historical one, that kind of was a miracle that became slightly popular at all. And I can't even remember the name of it. But yeah, that in recent history has been the only really major successful new Broadway play that an average person may have heard of. Hamilton is the name of it. They also have a Herman Melville Award for Best Writing in a Game, which again, who's Herman Melville? If you have to look it up. Statue of Liberty Award, Best World. They clearly are buying into the New York culture. Tin Pan Alley Award. All of these titles are too clever for their own good, when it really should just be Best Acting in a Game. I imagine most people probably would just call it Best Acting in the Game. It's almost like these are sponsored titles. Microsoft has given up on their mixed reality product. I don't think I saw a story there that I opened, but I did see it elsewhere, which not super surprising on that aspect either. Microsoft really hadn't gotten anywhere with mixed reality. I wouldn't be surprised if they haven't 100% given it up, and that there are some office uses in which mixed reality will still be promoted or pushed, but as far as it being a product of augmented reality or virtual reality that you would own in your house or even likely own in your office, unless you work at a very big office with lots of money to waste, is going to be almost zero. What the odds are. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is now free at the Epic Games Store. You have 24 hours to claim it, so maybe this is already gone. Until January 11th. It's not 24 hours by any means. 24 hours to claim the PC version. I recently played this game, but turned on the streamer mode, and without having the licensed music playing, the game was considerably worse than I imagine it would have been if I had been listening to the licensed music. But overall, as a Telltale game, it still was pretty bad, and the experience playing Telltale games these days is really, really poor, because you're just not getting any kind of statistics as to what other players chose. They really should just put up an update that would give you some statistics of what they had on their server before they shut down the servers, to compare it to that. Is this the Telltale game? Wait a minute, let me double check here. I don't think this is the Telltale game. It just looks so similar. I don't have an expiring thing. all the videos up front. I'm glad Steam fixed that. Nope, this is a completely different game, so I haven't even played this one. Yeah. The Telltale game, though, was rough. In general, I've just never been super interested into the Guardians of the Galaxy. And, yeah. While I'm here, I'll just unload my screen and see if I can actually purchase the order. And this is what I run into every time, is it gives me this CAPTCHA. Fair enough. Click all the images of the heaviest animal species, which is a weird choice, but whatever. There's 2 polar bears, and then there's, as far as I can tell, this is just snow, 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 and a penguin. And then I click verify, and then it says this. It says, failed to challenge CAPTCHA, please try again later. I just have no idea what's going on wrong there. But that is the problem that I've been running into consistently with the Epic Games Store at this point, is that something there is failing. And I just don't care enough to investigate it further to get more free games on the Epic Store that I'll never use. Digital Foundry put out a video testing Unreal Engine 5 in general on the Steam Deck, and yeah, it seems like Unreal Engine 5 can, at medium and low settings, still play games on the Steam Deck fairly well, but there is a certain level here at which the Steam Deck OLED version is still a little weak, and it's just not going to play things at the highest frame rate, the highest resolution, with the highest amount of features enabled, which is a shame. And if they were to make something like a Steam Stream Deck, maybe they could get that higher thing, but inherently you can already do that with a Steam Deck. So they really should just get the price down on the Steam Deck and encourage more people to use Moonlight, I believe is the name of the software, to stream their video games from their PC on their local network to a Steam Deck. Then you can keep the visual settings as high as your PC can handle, which I think that has more value. They just need to make it work and make it more obvious that it works. Apparently Rockfish is going to, quote, future-proof, which you really can't future-proof anything, Everspace 2 with the Unreal Engine 5 upgrade. I don't know how you're really future-proofing much there, because then as soon as there's an Unreal Engine 6, you're just going to have to future-proof and change the code more with that upgrade. It's not just going to magically convert over, although it does seem like moving from Unreal Engine 3 to 4 to 5 is fairly easy. It still takes coding. It's still it's not just 100% forward compatible, I'm sure. And even if you did have the code being 100% forward compatible, it's probably not using any optimizations or new features that would be in Unreal Engine 5. So we don't want to get into a situation where people are buying games because they're labeled as being in the Unreal Engine 5, but it turning out that the games aren't using any Unreal Engine 5 features, and they just compiled it on the new version. The same thing is similar case in the Smart On Air side. Like, I don't want to spend a lot of time upgrading the ESP IDF that's used to compile the program if I'm just changing code to use the newest version, but not adding any features or not making anything more efficient. Which, yeah, that evaluation would very much have to happen before I made that commitment to upgrading the software. Everspace as a game is something I've heard of, but I don't know if there's really anything here. This feels very much like an advertisement more than an actual article, but it does also kind of feel like GameDeveloper.com is just getting back into the habit of posting more articles now that they're back from break. And I guess GameDeveloper.com probably deserves an apology from me, because it turns out, even though they did recently change their new website, turns out that they don't seem to be the culprit that was being detected as having a virus on their website, or causing a virus to be detected on my computer. Video Games Chronicle says Hideo Kojima says he wants a new job in 2024 so that he can, quote, have a meal, which I assume he's mostly just joking there. Like, I seriously doubt he would just quit without having enough money to survive. It would be a tragedy amongst tragedies if people, very successful people in the game industry in Japan, end up homeless or starving to death. And you kind of just don't see a lot of that anyways in Japan. Their system isn't perfect by any means, but generally you have some family member that will take you in and abuse you or ignore you, and so there really isn't just a large amount of homelessness. Plus you have the extremely cheap rental locations available in Tokyo, and I'm sure other places in Japan, where if it is really just $5 a day to sleep in this cubicle, then you can be semi-homeless fairly easily. There's also a lot of abandoned cars, so living in a car, a lot of abandoned houses outside of Tokyo that you could probably squat in. Also, there's also suicide forests and other things, so yeah. Plus, just being so drunk that you are passed out on the street, which you do see videos of that happening in Japan, makes it difficult to really determine if somebody's homeless or if they've just taken a nap on the street because they were drunk. If you have a large amount of emotional barrier and aren't going to have a mental breakdown watching it, the Grave of the Fireflies movie is kind of a great example of that, although I really don't recommend anybody watch it more than once, and watch it around a supportive group of friends or family, because it will just break your heart. But yeah, in Grave of the Fireflies you have young children taken in and not treated well, but not allowed to just be wandering homeless after the nuclear bombs were dropped. Although in that case of Grave of the Fireflies, I do believe they actually did starve to death, so I guess I was wrong on that one. Come to think of it, it's been a long time since I watched it. Spoiler for the movie, I guess, but that's definitely a spoiler worth happening. Inherently, a story like this doesn't mean that much, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is an indication that Hideki Kamiya is not ready to announce anything as far as forming a new company or announcing a new game, and he may very well not be ready to do that for a year or two, just thinking of ideas, working on a design bible, working on establishing a company. Inherently, a lot of people that leave their job have already secretly done all the planning and preparation to start a new company or start a new project, and so leaving the job is just the final step in a plan. Whereas if you truly just leave the job, yeah, a lot of work has to happen there, certainly at this level of success. If you leave a job and you're at a lower level of success, well, then you're just desperately looking for employment, which employment's probably pretty easy to get in Japan if you're willing to debase yourself or take temporary jobs. That's a high an element in Japan too, is that there's definitely temporary jobs you can work for just a few hours a day and get paid, and that's it. You can be working at like a 7-Eleven, like Konbani, I think is what they're called, or you can be a mover or a house cleaner, things like that, and just simple one-day employment. Of course, one-day employment anywhere in the world is not very helpful. It doesn't build a resume, doesn't give you any stability, just gives you enough money to feed yourself to wake up the next day and work a different job. Unfortunately, that's the case for a lot of jobs, is that you get paid starvation wages, so you have to continuously stick to the job, and then the job can just continuously exploit you and get worse and worse. And you just never get out of that hole because you're not being paid enough to save up and get more education, or look for a better job, or move, or in any way get your life in a different kind of order to make a big life change, like changing a job. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says that New Zealand's government has reaffirmed support for the game development sector rebate. The initiative allows eligible studios to claim a 20% tax rebate and is worth $40 million per annum. I assume annum is a fancy word per year or financial year. There was talk, I don't believe Valve has fully moved their business offices to New Zealand, but clearly there was this desire by Gabe Newell to be in New Zealand and have offices in New Zealand, although Gabe Newell really is not, I think, the one that should make that decision, because I don't think he's really working at Valve as much as the other people that work at Valve, and having potentially hundreds of people move from Washington State in the United States to New Zealand is just asking a lot. If anything, Gabe Newell's going to start a small corporate office with 2 or 3 people in it in New Zealand, and for tax reasons, that Valve is going to be based out of New Zealand for that reason. 20% tax rebate is probably a attractive tax rebate, although inherently I don't know if New Zealand has enough people in it in general to just justify having video game companies move to New Zealand. I don't know if they have enough people to staff those offices and actually make video games. Although for a smaller countries like New Zealand, it might very well be a case where just having businesses established in your country so you can get tax income of anything might be your best bet, and a good idea. Although, in fairness, England tried that with their banking sector in London, and it really hasn't led to money through taxes supporting the rest of England. So it is really probably too much of a scheme to actually work, just to have tax rebate schemes. Moving on, there's an obituary here from GameDeveloper.com. Brian Ansell, the Warhammer co-creator, has passed away. Ansell co-made the original Warhammer and led Games Workshop decades-long focus on it and the spiritual sequel Warhammer 40k. If this is the person I was thinking of, and look at this photo here, he was 68 years old, so I would assume this is a photo from many years ago. It definitely looks like a photo from many years ago, decades ago. He apparently passed away peacefully. If this is the person, I think he was one of the original co-founders of the original Fallout series, but they're not saying that, so I guess I'm wrong there. I did hear some story of one of the original co-creators of the Fallout series. I think that the story there was that he was working with a new company, just giving advice, it seemed like. which, yeah, if you're a major fan of Fallout 1 and 2, that could be encouraging. I think he was working maybe with Pathfinder developers. As for Brian Ansell, if we can keep those people separate in my mind, I'm not sure he actually worked at any point towards actually making any of the Warhammer games. And the Warhammer games, the Warhammer 40k games, have all been pretty awful as far as video games go. The tabletop games clearly have a fandom. I don't know if that fandom isn't mostly people who just like to paint the little miniatures, but I really haven't ever heard or seen anybody actually play Warhammer as an actual game, as an actual tabletop game. But there is something clearly attractive to the Warhammer backstory and universe, and there is obviously going to be continued efforts to make Warhammer 40k video games, and one day I hope one of them is actually good enough that people would actually play it and enjoy it. But it, I think, might very well be a case of funding and licensing, and that the people who own the rights to Warhammer 40k probably should develop a game in-house and stop licensing games, video games, to other companies, if I was to guess what's going wrong. Or do the exact opposite if they are developing the games in-house and they need to license it to somebody else. Video games, GameDeveloper.com says that the MapleStory developer Nexon has been fined $8.9 million by the Korean regulator for misleading players. The Korea Fair Trade Commission claims Nexon altered the odds of purchasable item drops without informing players. Which, yeah, that sounds bad, although 8.9 million may not be much for a video game company. It could be quite a bit, though, depending on the mobile game. And then, I hate to talk about Marvel Snap, but they put out their roadmap, latest developer roadmap for Marvel Snap heading into 2024. Coming soon, in the category of coming soon, is character mastery, album improvements, in-game events, selectable card effects, selectable borders, new infinity splits, and collectible reactions. Anything here. Several of these are probably going to be sold to you for more money. Although having selectable borders and selectable card effects are kind of things that should have been there day one. In development, they're looking for a Clans 1.0 version, and then collectible borders, I guess, are different than collectible reactions. More things to sell. Booster VATs, more event types, and an in-game graveyard, which, yeah, might be helpful if a game had launched with an in-game graveyard for a card game. And then in concept, they're working for a completely new game mode with new game boards, with clan competitions, which would mean you'd have to get clans done first, and ultimate variant evolutions, and new card mechanics, which inherently Marvel Snap needed at least a couple more card mechanics when it launched too. So it's been, I think, 2 years now since Marvel Snap has come out, and while they are still committed to it, it definitely doesn't seem like they're changing much or doing anything too different. Let's see. Speaking earlier, we spoke of China and them announcing or pre-announcing regulations and that causing a mess. Well, apparently in 2023, the Chinese regulators did approve nearly 1,100 games, which that's double the games that were released, that were approved in 2022. So they are going in the right direction. Although we saw in the last stream that it was estimated that 14,000 games were released on Steam in 2023. And even if we were to subtract 10,000 of those games to say that they are absolute garbage games, that would still leave about 4,000 games released on Steam that probably should have been allowed to be sold in China also. Although, if I was to truly try and figure out the number of games that came out supporting the Chinese language, the numbers would probably be significantly different there. So if one of the rules is that Chinese games have to be in Chinese language, then that would drastically change the calculation. But roughly saying here, it does seem like they approved about 1/4 of the games that they probably should have, and arguably if China was a free country, or however you want to take that, they would have approved all 14,000 games that were available on Steam, and there wouldn't be any censorship at all, or any regulation or limitation there. It would be a much more acceptable headline, in my opinion, if it was that the Chinese regulators denied approval to nearly 1,100 games in China, because that is much more reasonable. I could easily find 1,100 games that came out in 2023 that have just gambling mechanics or are just absolute garbage that you could be denied very quickly. That's effectively what I'm doing when I'm looking at games to make YouTube shorts on them. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says the Smash Bros. Director Masahiro Sakurai confirms that he, quote, still is creating games. He claimed that he was semi-retired in 2021, and I guess that's still haunting him. There's still, I think, a major question here as far as what the next Smash Bros. Game would look like and what Nintendo can really do with the next Smash Bros. Game. And if anything, I think there is an argument to make a Switch 2 or a new Nintendo console of some sort that is pushing towards a third player or a fourth player more often, and you could certainly have a Smash Bros. Game promote that idea more as having 4 players, because there's a lot of Nintendo games that really work well if there's 4 people playing. Mario Party, Smash Brothers, Mario Kart, or 4 more people playing. So they could definitely go in that direction. Although there's plenty of games like Mario Odyssey that don't really work at all past the second player. And yeah, that may not be the gimmick that a new Nintendo console really needs. Inherently, a new console of any sort should have some hardware acceleration for streaming video to smartphones and computers and things like that. There should just be some kind of wireless display technology, even if it's literally just doing a 6 gigahertz, 7 gigahertz, Wi-Fi 6E, Wi-Fi 7 connection to wirelessly stream video to wireless TVs. That technology should be at least experimented with lately. Crystal Dynamics on their Twitter is giving 5 years celebration for their IT support specialist Thomas Ocampo, which it's nice to see these kinds of shout outs, and you definitely don't see it from any other video game company, but it is also questionably a bit awkward and maybe perhaps privacy invading to put out pictures of people on your public Twitter to private employees who really shouldn't be in the spotlight, particularly if you're cropping some image. Clearly this guy has somebody's hand on his shoulder and there's a shoulder here, so they just cropped out a larger image to show this guy, and he's just wearing a t-shirt. And so this isn't a office picture, ID badge picture, or anything like that. where it would be better if there was a more professional picture and he's standing in front of some kind of display or fountain or something. There's some gargoyles and grotesques on the back side of the picture. Yeah, maybe it would be better to just say the name and say congratulations in general. Refused classification is a Twitter that follows the censorship that happens in Australia, and they put out a tweet saying that the Curse of Kudan from Prototype Info has been banned in Australia under the Automated International Age Rating Coalition system. The Nintendo Switch port was released on December 23rd, but the RC means it is unavailable to the refused classification is unavailable in the Australian store. Now, why was it banned? Well, it looks like it's a visual novel. It looks like there's anime girls in it, and Australian people in general don't like anime and anime girls in general. These characters don't look particularly young looking by the kawaii cute anime style. But yeah, clearly there's either something in it that is shown or said that they don't like. If you scroll down further on refused classification, there's a lot of stuff that gets censored in the extremely conservative government of Australia. It is potentially a growing problem, but it's also kind of hard for Australia to have any influence on any other country. However, increasingly you are seeing countries like Australia try and make UN, United Nations rulings to influence anime in particular and hentai to go away and make it illegal worldwide. And there is this inherent danger where trade agreements, treaties, things like that are allowing a one world government to form itself very slowly by committee, when individual governments are giving up their individuality by agreeing to UN rulings or trade agreements. In general, the copyright law system is a great example of that, where countries are respecting other countries' copyrights at time, and then you have some countries that aren't respecting copyrights at all, so it's just a mess of a playing field where nobody's playing fair, and everything is just getting confused very much. Censored Gaming almost certainly will retweet refused classification in the next day or two, or report on it, on the game being banned, refused classification. But in the meantime, Censored Gaming also put out yet another video talking about how a fan patch has been released for Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters. This removes what they're calling the ESRB censorship, but it really is censorship coming from the makers of Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters to stay in line with the ESRB's rulings and rules. It takes out some curse words and dirty words, and they put the patch in. They automatically updated the software to remove the dirty words in both the United States version and the European version, and that made fans of the Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters series unhappy, so now this fan patch undoes that, which we need to see almost certainly more of that happening. Let's see. How the English version of Rhapsody added a joke about direct translation. This is another video that he just posted 26 minutes ago, I guess. Dave the Diver has sold over 3 million copies worldwide, according to GameDeveloper.com. And then GameDeveloper.com has an article here saying why Don't Nod Montreal will probably be the last studio to adopt AI. Don't Nod's Montreal teen supernatural story Lost Records, Bloom and Rage shows why many game studios can't get much out of generative AI. Inherently, Don't Nod's games have never been particularly good in the gameplay aspect, and they've been alright in the visuals. So their story in particular is all that the Don't Nod games have, and even those haven't been really good. So when you have these mediocre games that really just got worse and worse and worse, as after their initial success with their first game, which I can't even remember the name of it, it doesn't make any sense at all for them to try and cut corners. They've got to really do the telltale thing of trying to have as much polish as possible without doing the telltale thing of never upgrading their engine and taking on too many projects and cutting corners and coming out cheaply. Even at that, I really don't suspect Don't Nod games are going to ever really succeed very well. But I do think and agree with the general idea that even if there are upper managers and CEOs who are talking about generative AI and AI in general, the actual artists are going to very quickly find that the systems just don't work that well. It doesn't work that well in programming. It doesn't work that well in writing. It doesn't work that well in image generation. There is just a plateau, I think, that AI has hit, and the hype needs to die down to that plateau. And we may very well be stuck at that plateau as far as AI for years, if not decades, if not forever. And it may very well be a case that AI is just this very short-lived fad that people talked about, and then people quickly stop talking about it because they can't actually accomplish anything with it. So far, we have yet to see a single successful case of AI really working. It's almost like the equivalent of rotoscoping video, which A Scanner Darkly, I believe is the name of the movie that had rotoscope video, live action video that is then digitally traced over to look like an animation. And then there is a Amazon Prime series that has the video also rotoscoped. And honestly, I don't know why they bothered to even do that. But that's pretty much the only two cases where rotoscoping has ever been done in a major project. And it doesn't look good in either one of them. It creates a very squiggly line, squiggle vision looking type of animation that it's just really hard to relate to or appreciate. It feels nothing like any other animation possible. It'd be better to not rotoscope and just trace or draw over. So we've got our charts for today. Let's see. Still big numbers over the 100,000 point in the top 14. Perhaps we've seen a slight drop in player base in the finals. Everything is still pretty much the same. It's definitely going to be a case that if by this time next year, like by the end of 2024, I'm looking at the exact same 15 games on this chart, then the chart will have completely failed at that point. There's just no point to on a multiple times a week basis talk about Apex Legends going up and down. Here we can see Rock Blade Point has gotten a resurgence. And it definitely feels like Noir Complete Point sometimes drops down, then sometimes comes back, so there's probably some kind of event that happens here. Rust seems like it's gotten a bit of a resurgence. I would assume that that is an event too. And my chart, while broken in several places and not connecting the lines, missing data points, is still squeezing all the dates in back to the 16th of September. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when we finally run out of room. But yeah, overall this chart's not really telling me much as far as what gamers are playing, other than it's just reminding me that a large amount of gamers just play the same games over and over again for years and years and years, and they aren't inherently the kind of gamers that would watch YouTubers looking for consumer advice. And those are the locked-in gamers that would probably always have their own thing going on. Here, this is a interesting looking game, but I didn't really mean to click on it that way. I meant to open a new tab. And noticeably that game disappeared. Oh, I guess I could say I'm still playing Memento Mori, although yesterday was potentially the first day in Memento Mori where I would have missed doing the dailies since starting to play it. And they are going to do some kind of crossover with two previous games that the creator Bank of Innovation had done before, but I don't know what those crossovers are going to look like, and I don't know if I can even install and play the two previous games, or if they've been shut down, or if they are Korean only. Backpack Hero, that's one of the ones where you organize your backpack. The winter sale obviously is over now, so we are back to the same old Steam. Dark blue still being used, and then a lighter blue that fades down to a darker blue. It's weird that it resets, and then eventually you just scroll down to a point where you start to get black background, and then you're back to blue, and then black background. It does seem like maybe we've gotten to the point now where it's toggling between black background and blue background more and more, and eventually we will just, I suspect, years from now, have a completely black background Steam, which is fine. In my opinion, they probably should just do it. The blue button is the light blue. It's all weird. I don't know of any other website, video game website or other, that has light blue text on slightly darker blue buttons on darker blue backgrounds. A 3 blue color palette is not artistically something I think you really should go with. And we see with the Steam Deck they are promoting red more than blue, which even that seems very weird. Alright, let's see. How many of these Video Games Chronicle articles did we already talk about? That one. Apparently Baldur's Gate 3 devs are looking into Xbox players being banned for recording explicit scenes. The issue is annoying and uncool, according to Larian. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a case where just recording them with full nudity and sex scenes is getting automatically flagged by Microsoft. Even though you're just recording it for potentially your own personal use. And it does seem like this is a case where Microsoft, if they're going to have games that allow nudity and sex, which they do, they need to have this video can only be recorded privately, or this video has been locked to being private option as they're scanning the videos, and not implementing strikes. Although in all fairness, if you were to try to upload porn or the nudity sex scenes from Baldur's Gate 3 onto YouTube, even as a private video, they probably would give you a strike on YouTube also, and delete the video. They wouldn't let you just privately own it, which definitely highlights that there is room for some kind of video streaming saving service, some kind of Pornhub-like service, which maybe it is just Pornhub, where you can upload your personal videos and keep them your personal videos, and people aren't going to scan or delete them or complain about that. But there's a lot of legal problems with that, certainly. And Pornhub in particular, I talk about it as just being the general, this is the porn site that people know about, but in reality Pornhub's not really that good, and probably should be talking closer to something like RedTube or Xhamster or whatever the other sites are. Let's see, I think we talked about most of these. Oh, there was this teenager, 13-year-old, who is thought to have gotten to the, quote, true kill screen of Tetris, although arguably level 255, not 118, I think was what she got to, might be the actual true kill screen, at which point you can't play any further, even if you tried. My understanding, and this is from a long time ago, is that it was really a case where Tetris at one point just gets so fast you can't go any further. But yeah, in reporting on this big achievement for a 13-year-old, this Sky News presenter told the person to go outside, and weirdly the same Sky News presenter had, in the same broadcast, given awards and accolades to a teenager who had won a darts championship, which that too is not an outside activity. Here's the full comments here. Beating Tetris is not a life goal. Yeah, for you, Sandra. How many world records had you set at 13 years old? What a small-minded, smug, horrible way to belittle this kid's achievement. Is this all a quote? As the mother, I'd be super effing proud. This took skill and determination. This is Rare's Becky Frost from the company Rare. So this is a quote of somebody else. It's not the quote that should be. I should have seen first. But yeah, effectively causing controversy by making an offhanded comment you probably shouldn't be making. Why to Yoshi? That's the question. I get the glove. Like, I could see extra cushioning while playing Tetris Forever. The young age is surprising, certainly, but I'm not going to belittle or question it and, like, assume that some kind of cheating happened here. If anything, a 13-year-old might be the only type of person with time and determination to get that far in Tetris. But yeah, don't make offhand comments. Be very careful about what you say. A lot of these things are said live and slips of the tongue, so maybe we should cut the news presenter some slack, but it is a great example of a much larger problem, because this really isn't a big issue. Somebody shot their mouth off somewhere. The bigger issue is that this 13-year-old accomplished something that no other gamer has been able to do since Tetris was released and invented nearly 30 plus years ago. 40 years maybe ago. So that is a major accomplishment, and yet there's still this mentality that video games are worthless and that your achievements in video games are worthless, which, while I might agree that achievements in video games are worthless, achievements in general are worthless if you don't put any value in them. The value comes from inside, whether your achievement matters to you or not. very few people are going to cure cancer. So far, at least 10 billion people have not cured cancer because it hasn't been cured yet. Very few people are going to do anything to affect climate change for the better. So just having fun and living your life is an acceptable goal, an acceptable thing to do, and you shouldn't be belittled for doing something you enjoy and doing something that is rather amazing just because it's a video game. But there is this inherent hate by parents, in particular video games. Parents like that tend to not really even think that much as far as what they want their kids to do otherwise, or their suggestions are pretty ridiculous, that they should be reading books nonstop. That these are the kinds of parents that tend to not want to have their kids watching any TV at all. Like, I agree with the screen time idea. It seems like a good system, but there definitely are parents out there that it's like 1 hour a week, 1 hour a month, no TV ever. You can only watch Veggie Tales or heavily religious propaganda type TV or movies. You can only read specific books. You can only we want you to read way more than an average child really should be reading. You know, they used to say that reading too much was unhealthy too. So 200 years ago, this was the exact same argument being made. Just older generations effectively just bullying their children. just being rude, being mean, belittling people. It's not like this Sky News presenter is doing that much with her life either. She's just in front of the camera reporting news. Moving on now. We already talked about this story, and we already talked about this. Apparently the Xbox Series S toaster is finally here, if you really wanted such a ridiculous gimmick. Here's the story I was talking about before. The Fallout creator or co-creator Tim Kaine is consulting on the Outer Worlds 2. Kaine served as the co-director on the first game, so I guess maybe he's the creator and he was the co-director. Maybe that's more accurate. Kaine has his own YouTube channel too, which is weird, where he just talks about game development in a, I assume, semi-retired state. But it very possibly might be a better type of YouTube channel to follow and subscribe to, is to see an actual game developer talk about actual game development versus following people who just review games or play video games or just talk about the latest controversy around video games, which is mostly who I follow as far as the video game YouTubers that I do follow. So I am gonna try to make a special effort to find his YouTube channel and subscribe to it. And then these are older stories, Switch 2 likely to be an iteration rather than a revolution. Then January Game Pass titles, and then alleged use of AI art for indie games promotion. That brings us to the Gematsu articles. Reigns 3 Kingdoms is coming to the Switch and PC on January 11th. It's currently available for iOS and Android. I somewhat recently covered Reigns, Your Majesty. I don't really think I'd want to play yet another Reigns game, but we'll give it a follow anyways and think about it later. World of Demons being delisted, Persona 3 Reloaded opening movie, a free-to-play fighting game sequel, Tori Bash Next, has been announced for PC. Which, yeah, this doesn't really look like anything, so I'm not even going to make a YouTube short around it. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown World and Accessibility Deep Dive trailers are available on Gematsu if you want to check that out. This does seem to be boiling down different bosses you'll fight, and if there's 5 bosses, then that probably speaks to the overall length of the game. and that it isn't going to be super long. Although it could be 5 big bosses and then giant Metroidvania levels, or Castlevania-like levels. Grime for Switch launches January 25th along a free DLC called Parting Shade, which I'm not 100% sure what Grime is, but it is on my wish list. Yeah, it is a Metroidvania game that clearly was received very well. And then I just put it on the wish list and then immediately forgot about it. Cyberpunk 2077 expansion Phantom Liberty has sold sales of topped 5 million. Top Racer Collection has been delayed to March 7th. Phantom Abyss launches January 25th. Let's see what Phantom Abyss is. I didn't even care about the racing game. This is the one where it's multiple people running, trying to parkour their way. Early access from 2021. Again, not a game I think I really even care to make a YouTube short on, but it is coming out as version 1.0, so I will, in that case, make a YouTube short, but I'm still not going to put it on the wish list. I'm trying to be a little bit more precious on what gets on the wish list and what doesn't. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth pre-launch preview, gameplay, and screenshots are available on Gamatsu. A Boys Love visual novel, Voice Love on Air, launches this spring for Switch and PC. Let's see if we've... See, and this is a case where I could see putting this out and making a YouTube short on it and then not putting it on the fall list, and then there being an announcement. And a new announcement as far as a release date, and then getting 2 YouTube shorts. But I'll put it on the fall list to avoid that. The Bridge Curse 2 Extraction launches 2024 for all consoles and PC, which makes me wonder what happened to the Bridge Extraction 1, the Bridge Curse 1. Let's see, this one here, Road to Salvation. Yeah, it looks like a horror game that might actually be a horror game. Let's see, a roguelike deck builder, Lost in Fantaland, is coming to the PS5 and Switch in June. Edo Japan set RPG Yasha Legends of the Demon Blade launches in October for all consoles and PC. I feel like I'm doing a pretty poor job today of making sure I'm leaving the right tabs open to make YouTube shorts on it. Dragon's Dogma 2 has 18 minutes of fighter, thief, warrior, and sorcerer gameplay if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. And then the Xbox Game Pass, adding games. And then we talked about Dave the Diver selling, sales topping 3 million. And then Persona 5, the Phantom X heart stealing test beginning in January 16th in China only. And that's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com, and I think we've pretty much talked about all the GameDeveloper.com. Apparently Savi Group still wants the Saudi Arabia to be a global hub for game development. I doubt that's really going to happen. I would assume Savi Group is somehow invested in the Saudi Arabian Public Interest Fund. Apparently Until Dawn shed light on the original version of their game. And let's see if there's any other news things. There's actually quite a few news stories here. But yeah, we've covered them all as it was. And overall, I'm still not doing the best of jobs as far as doing fall list cleanup. Here are the games that came out in the last stream that I'm potentially giving a chance to. We have one that looks like a Nintendo 64 game. More, I think a lot of these games I left open just to show off, although some of them, on second glance, I question why I decided to show them off. Although that is just the general plan, is to have two looks between two different days when I might have more mental energy and not be so exhausted, to filter out the games that came out. Is this a naked guy walking around, or is it just somebody in pink pajamas? I think it's someone in pink pajamas. Yeah. I feel like I didn't look at any of these games. I thought I had curated the games today, but maybe I didn't. Obviously, my next step is still to just finish Zelda Breath of the Wild. There will be temptations that I'll try to avoid, as far as just collecting all the hearts and all the upgrades. I'm already spoiling myself in several times when I'm getting lost and looking up online what items do what and what to get and what do I not need to really get. So I imagine I will just pull the trigger near the end and decide if there's anything I really need. That is another aspect of Skyward Sword that I don't think I really enjoy, in that it does feel like the old Zelda games, you really needed to collect almost everything, and you basically had to collect almost everything in old NES Zelda games. By the time you're at Ocarina of Time, you're still mostly collecting 95% of everything, but there's usually like one or two items that are extra. By the time you're at Skyward Sword, there's just infinite numbers of collectible insects and monster parts to craft things and upgrade things, and you can have infinite numbers of shields and to improve and craft. So it's kind of crazy to like buy the wooden sword and fully upgrade the wooden sword, then buy the sacred shield and fully upgrade the sacred shield. I meant to say shield there. Buy the wooden shield and fully upgrade it, then buy the metal shield and fully upgrade it. This might be interesting. A rum running simulator. It's probably not, but I'll give it a chance. It definitely would have been nice if collecting a certain number of collectibles let you upgrade potions in general, so all potions going forward were upgraded instead of having to go back and upgrade each potion individually in Skyward Sword. This is probably nothing, but I'm gonna give it a chance. It looks like a Tapper clone. I've got my auto blur enabled right now, which for the most part that should be disabled. Although the auto blur is acting as a reminder. This is already mixed, so I'm going to say no to it. That I'm still not looking at adult games. So as far as I know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, Steam just stopped putting out adult games altogether on their storefront. They probably didn't, but that's as far as I know. We're still not really seeing a massive amount of high quality games. There are effectively just 5 games that are going to end up getting YouTube Shorts from the last stream as far as just new games. And that division is just very high between people who just put their game on Steam and then promote it with put no effort into promoting it at all, and then people who bother to put out a press release and send it to at least Gematsu. The games we see on Gematsu are at least a step or two higher in quality compared to something like this, which just looks very generic and not unique enough to really catch my attention. Yeah. So overall, that was 5 games that I ended up even giving a chance to. Yeah, and my stream is all broken, so we'll just look at black screen here now because of the auto blur. Anyways, I really thought this was going to become a much longer stream than it turned out to be. We were able to really power through it, thank goodness. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there may be some links down below. Thank you for